It took me a long time to write this book. I don't mean it took me a long time to actually sit down and write the book. I mean it took me a long time to face writing this book. I made a lot of notes, as I always do. I put these notes in manila folders, 10 manila folders, and I put an elastic band around each folder. Then I took the 10 folders and put a giant elastic band around all 10 of them. This hasn't got a good ending. I found an old brown travel bag and put the bound folders into the travel bag and carefully zipped up the bag. I placed the zipped up bag in the drawer of a metal filing cabinet and shut the drawer very firmly. I checked to make sure the drawer was firmly shut. And then I went on with my life. Every now and then I walked past the firmly shut filing cabinet drawer, looked at it, and kept walking. I couldn't open the drawer. 1 year went by, 2 years, 3 years. Once, with my heart palpitating, I opened the drawer to make sure that all 10 folders were still firmly zipped up in the travel bag. They were. I shut the drawer again. This inability to look at my notes had never happened to me before. Finally, after 3.5 years, I decided that I either had to face writing the book or just dump it. I took the brown bag out of the filing cabinet drawer and gave myself 3 months to start writing or to decide that I wasn't going to write this book. I took myself and the brown travel bag to Shelter Island, a small island 90 miles from Manhattan. I unpacked all my notes. I put out my writing equipment. On my left I had my pens, pencils, erasers, pencil sharpeners, post-it notes and paper clips. And on my right 5 or 6 notebooks in assorted sizes. As soon as I had arranged all of these, I started to feel calm. Few people are made calm by paper clips. I am. I started writing. Once I started, I couldn't stop. I worked all day, 7 days a week for 11 months. I barely went outside. I was certain that the lack of sunlight must be causing me to have a vitamin D deficiency. I bought a huge jar of vitamin D pills. I am still not sure why it took me so long to face writing this book. And I really should know, I have spent half my income and 3/4 of my life in psychoanalysis, so you would think I would understand a few things about myself. My own story has remarkable parallels to Lola Bensky's story. I worked for an Australian newspaper as a rock journalist in London, New York, Los Angeles and Monterey, California. My parents were horrified. They wanted me to be a lawyer or a doctor, but really a lawyer. I think in some ways I didn't want to look at that time in my life. It felt in many ways too painful, but I'm very glad I did face it. I had forgotten how much I missed the feeling of being immersed in a novel, being so steeped in another world that that world becomes your reality. Your daily life, with its unavoidable irritations and chores, hardly seems to exist. For the entire time I was writing Lola Bensky, I was in 1967. The fact that it was 2011 barely registered. And I had forgotten the surprise of how, if you are still enough, memories and feelings that have been buried for decades can surface with great clarity. I'd also forgotten how very happy writing makes me. My children, when they saw me, commented on how much happier I looked. Every now and then I left the house, usually to go and visit my father. People I knew told me how well I looked. Sitting in one place for hours is clearly beneficial for your health, I decided. And so is eating a lot of cabbage. I had a cabbage craze. It's something not many people experience. All I wanted for dinner every night was cabbage, and more cabbage. This hadn't happened to me. My poor husband, yes. It's true, he doesn't like cabbage. This hadn't happened to me since 1998. The same thing happened to me in 1998 when I was writing Suhrkamp. But it was more understandable then. After all, much of Suhrkamp was set in Poland, and cabbage features quite prominently in Polish cuisine. My father, who is 96, not quite as old as you, but he's 96, was also very relieved that I was writing again. For the 3.5 years the notes were in the filing cabinet drawer, he had asked me, more frequently than was necessary, if I thought I had lost the knack. The question bothered me for many reasons. Firstly, the ability to write a book couldn't be summed up as a knack. And secondly, I was worried that I might indeed have lost the knack. Once I started writing, my father didn't stop asking about the knack. He just rephrased his question from, do you think you have still got the knack, to, do you think you have still got the same knack? I said I would let him know when I finished the book. I myself wasn't worrying about the knack. I was so happy to be sitting in my study, moving words around, arranging and rearranging them until they said exactly what I wanted them to say. When I write about real-life personalities in fiction, I want to make those portraits as accurate as I can. I want to portray the people I am writing about as real people, which they are. I did this in Suhrkamp with Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz. I wanted to show Rudolf Höss as a real person, a husband, a father, a hard worker, someone we could all identify with, not as someone we could easily dismiss as just a monster. My mother, who was imprisoned in Nazi death camps, used to say to me that I would never ever know what people were capable of. That thought frightened me, and I knew that she really did know. I think that from the time I was very young, I wanted to know who people really were. Who they were underneath their pedicures or deodorants or their suits or dresses, underneath their skin. And that's what I set out to portray about Jimi Hendrix, Mick Jagger, Janis Joplin, Cher, and a clutch of other rock stars in Lola, Bensky. Another wonderful thing for me about writing is that I get to wear the most awful clothes. I have never been someone who can hang around the house in a sweatshirt or t-shirt, and I have never worn a pair of jeans in my life. My mother was well dressed all the time, even when she cleaned the house. It was as though she needed to be prepared for any eventuality, and I have inherited that need. However, when I write, I don't care what I look like. I choose loose, shapeless clothes. I don't want to feel constricted by anything. I wrote Lola Bensky in pale green cotton pyjama pants. It gets much worse, with little pink flowers dotted through the cotton, and an old brown cotton shirt that had been washed about 1,000 times. I've always been very grateful that I landed that first job as a rock journalist. I might never have known how much I loved to write. I was so naive and inexperienced that when the newspaper sent me to work overseas, it never occurred to me that an Australian rock newspaper might not sound very impressive to the rest of the world. I just assumed I would get the interviews I wanted. It didn't occur to me that a lot of people, especially in America, hardly knew where Australia was, let alone have heard of a rock newspaper called Go Set. In America, they used to ask me what language we spoke. Sometimes I said Yiddish. For a lot of the time, I felt like a fake journalist. I had never studied journalism. I was very deferential to the other journalists working in the rock world, and they were almost always men. Until I heard some of the questions they were asking the rock stars, like, what did you have for breakfast? Who would want to know that? I didn't really like loud music. I used to put my fingers in my ears. And I wasn't overwhelmed or overawed by celebrity. Something about having two parents who survived years of imprisonment in a ghetto and then in death camps made idolizing rock stars almost absurd. My parents' history, the murder of millions of people, is a piece of history that is part of my life. It is a piece of history that would never have happened if bigotry, racism and hatred hadn't been allowed and encouraged to flourish. I want to let people know the danger of deciding that another human being, possibly because of the colour of their skin, or their sexual orientation, or their religious beliefs, or even the music they play, is not quite as human as you. As the writer James Baldwin said, history does not merely refer to the past. On the contrary, the great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it within us, are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways, and history is literally present in all we do. My parents' history is part of me, part of my arteries and my lungs, part of my every breath. It has shaped me, shaped my writing, and in many ways made me a more thoughtful and sensitive person than I might have been. My father's family before the war was very wealthy. I might have been a very irritating, spoiled, very rich Jewish princess. Doesn't sound good to me.